Okay, hello. Delighted to welcome you all to ideasSPACE with the Urban Design Group, UrbanNous, and me, Christopher Martin. I'm an urban designer and planner focusing on the design of public realm and streets. I'm on the executive committee of the Urban Design Group and co-founder and director of urban strategy at Urban Movement. For this episode, we'll be focusing on art and culture, getting to the bottom of how and why this is so essential for us in cities in delivering better quality places and the effect and power of art on us as human beings. I'm joined from London by cultural strategist and producer and partner at Futurecity, Dobbin. Sherry, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm excited, and it's great always to talk about culture and arts being at the center of what we do and as a part of the community as opposed to something separate. So one thing that you had asked me is a little bit about, what are some of the ideas, what's my connection and how does this fit with urban? And so I thought I'd share a couple of images.
Yeah, please, that'd be great.
Yeah, with everybody. And just to say that I started in the performing arts. And the performing arts rely upon collaboration. And one of the things in the actual practice is how you pull various people together and you get them to a central place of understanding. And from that, you create something together that you wouldn't have been able to do on your own. So from the beginning, I found as I started to transition out of strictly an arts form, that all of these skills and this way of working translates very, very well to tackling problems, to helping people overcome fears, to helping them be more ambitious, to take risks, and to understand how artists and the arts can help us push ourselves, not just in the area of showcasing or producing arts and culture, but really how it helps us to advance ourselves and be more ambitious and risky. I was really interested in this idea of how do we make room for the future? Not just taking best practice and thinking that we just repeat it. How do we anticipate what is the aspiration of what arts and culture are doing and what the civic space wants? I started from a background, as I say, in performing arts. And for a while, I ran an insane art center. But the only way I can describe the Watermill Center is to say that we were the laboratory for developing the future of the avant-garde. And so I was able to work across a site that had all different types of indoor and outdoor spaces and work with artists from all over the world in different genres and different practices and help them to understand where their work might fit. And it helped to figure out where it fits within our cities, our rural environments, and our natural spaces, and really taking arts outside of a closed box or a specific context. And then I had this wonderful opportunity to actually develop and run a public art program in Times Square. And I sent off a proposal that was completely cold, and I thought there was no way they would go for it. And I basically said, the premise is Times Square, everybody will always come. People are coming from all over the world. They're just excited to be there. They're willing and open to see everything. You have an obligation to make it a city center again. And what makes a city center for New York, is the relationship to the arts. But not only that, you have an obligation because you're going to have an audience no matter what, to be crazy, experimental, and push the boundaries. So what gets me excited are having, collaborations with space that we wouldn't expect. This was a play that took place over 12 hours or 24 hours for a sleeping audience, where people would go down into this basement of a building in Times Square and lie down in cots, and an entire performance would happen around them. We mounted, an opera that was actually conceived of and directed by a visual artist, but then done by professionals who were experts in German expressionistic opera, one of the most obscure forms. Even opera people don't like it. And it was packed and people loved it because we understood how to use the city as the set and the scene. The thing about Times Square that, from the outside, people don't understand that actually New Yorkers love to hate it. And so one thing I love to do is to challenge the perceptions people have of space. And a lot of the ways that you can challenge people's perceptions very quickly is through programmatic work. So one of the first things we did on the day that the world was supposed to end was to have a huge gathering and have a happening. And Yoko Ono gave me permission to use John Lennon's Imagine. And we sang Imagine while her film of Imagine Peace ran up until midnight. And so I feel that we're responsible for the world not ending. We did things like I set up a program where I had to coordinate with 153 different people to get the electronic billboards in Times Square. And we set incredible visual works that still happen. It's been 8 years running every single night. And then it wasn't enough to do that. We decided that we actually could incorporate sound. So we could find a way that we started silent discos that were actually coordinated with the screens, and it turned the whole environment into a performance place. There was a point where there was a government shutdown. And so I had a piece that was called Capitalism Works for Me, True or False, where people actually got to discuss capitalism and surprise us with their vote about how it happened. There was a point where it was really being questioned whether there was any authenticity left in New York anymore. And so we actually worked with an artist who set up this mock sort of newsstand, bringing back something that was nostalgic, but actually was filled with work from contemporary artists. We did the first project with the French artist JR, where he actually worked with the government as opposed to against it or in guerrilla, to create a piece that covered the ground in Times Square with people's faces. And then, one of the weirdest things I guess we ever did, and when you get to take these odd things that make no sense, is we held a concert for dogs performed by, the underground artist Laurie Anderson in January, before midnight, in collaboration with her piece that was on the screen. And she did this also so she could celebrate the first responders, the K-9 unit, first responders for 9/11. So late at night, we had an incredible foray of police officers all decked out, with their K-9 unit and giving honor. We created seating then that was specifically designed to look up at the screens. And then that has turned into now a permanent emblem of place. And so I think the thing that excites me about the intersection between arts and culture and city space is that there's a nimbleness and a quickness that you can actually play with ideas and you can test them, and people can surprise you by what they will do or they will take from their public place. And it really, really can inform, the long-term design. And so, one of the things that I talk about is this idea that I have up on the screen right now, which is that, cultural organizations and creative industries, they're a sustainable investment to keeping a place dynamic. As occupiers, they will always create. They will always be showing off what is of interest and in relationship to, what are the contemporary themes of the day. And so for me, that's what really drives me, how to bring those aspects together and ensure that we can always feel that we can redefine our space.
That's brilliant. I love the idea that in cities, we always have an audience no matter what. So basically be bold. I think there's a clear message in there for urban designers and cities as a whole. I'd really like to sort of boil down into a lot of what you said and sort of look specifically at the challenges first. The challenge we face as urban designers. I think numerous projects we see in London, but also nationally and internationally, they start off with an enormous hoopla and great ambition when it comes to how they want to engage with art and indeed cultural strategy and what they want to deliver. And I thought all too often, as projects progress, art and cultural strategy sometimes fall into the role of a nice to have, something less serious than buildings and roads, and get diluted and put in a corner. Why do you think this happens? What is it about our process or history that means we prioritize in the way we do?
Well, I think a lot of this comes down to like what is statutory delivery and what is not. And again, I speak as an American also, and an American living in London, but then we have work in different countries. But one of the dangers is as soon as arts or culture aren't seen as a statutory delivery, which can be demonstrated through if it's taken out of education, for example, then people start to think of it as a nice to have. And that's just in our heads constantly in the periphery. So every single time you have to reintroduce the idea of what culture actually is and how it's really the glue or the adhesive that cuts across. And so I think you're exactly right. The problem is often in the process then, and how it's easy to sort of to write it out. Where we have an advantage right now is that what planning has been using for the last and developers have been using for the last 20 years, it doesn't work anymore. And particularly accelerated by pandemic, and then in the UK, with Brexit, you can't just fill up your ground floor the same way anymore.
Yeah.
So now people want to know, what else can you do? So now we're starting to find that more people are coming and saying, oh, well, maybe we should take a look at culture and where that fits in. And I think what's important and also what's difficult is that culture very often is the element that joins together all of the other shared objectives. Culture is a place in which the commercial interests, the civic interests, the community interests, and the consumer interests can all be spurred or elevated or excited through culture. And because it can be overlying or intersecting with other deliverables, it's why very often it's hard to place, it or ring fence a budget, for it specifically. So I think it's the process. And one thing that we're doing with the Urban Art Forum as part of Urban Land Institute, we put out a publication called Including Culture and Development. And while it has case studies, what we actually did was work with individuals all across who are involved in creating our urban realm to create a methodology. There's basically a 6-step process. And this can scale up or down. And it helps you with, no matter where you are, to go through a series of questions and to understand who you need to involve to get what it is that you think is right. And that is one of the key things. It's not just giving an answer and people replicating it. It's understanding why that case study was so successful and then giving them, the tools and the process to be able to find their own answer that's going to give them their own USP.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think we go about sort of hardwiring this into the places we shape, into developments? I mean, you've spoken about that. Sort of the Urban Land Institute work, which is really interesting. But I suppose what is it that we need to change at a sort of local, national, or at an individual development basis to make it not a choice, to make it something that actually is just nailed on?
Well, I mean, it could go into the planning process, and it could easily be, a condition of being able to put forward your planning application. There are ESGs now that are in different percentage. That is, the way that councils will rate a planning application. So it's very easy to say, well, we'd like you to have a cultural strategy for your place.
Something for the new design code, maybe, of the white paper.
Yeah, and there's the possibility also of having a simple toolkits. One thing we're talking about with Urban Art Forum is being able to put forward something to a suggestion of what would make licensing and then also event licensing much easier. Here's what you could provide that would make it very easy for cultural institutions to be able to do things in your public space. There's a possibility for having guidance of, here's the basic template or format that you would need to give to your developers to produce a cultural strategy so they can produce it for you. The way to think about it is that if you have a cultural strategy, the vision and the principles that you put behind it, that is your identity. Your branding is the contemporary way in which you sell that identity. But you want to have an identity of place that you're going to be able to use for the next 10 to 15 years of development that will be strong enough and robust enough to be able to adjust and flex. This can save, the planning, the design, and the development process potentially a year. If you set that early on and you have that ingrained, it will actually help everything else. Yeah. And we're finding now that we're getting pushed to bring cultural anchors into development so they can actually uplift, the profile of retail that they can attract and the F&B that they can attract. So it's not to take away from, it is to contribute to. And it does have a value not only unto itself, but into what it is that you can put on the place and the other occupiers and tenants who might be present.
Yeah, hugely. It entirely defines our perception of a place, doesn't it? So I think it's that value there is huge. And I think linked to that point is being able to demonstrate that the sort of tangible benefits of embedding art and this sort of cultural strategy in the places that we deliver. I appreciate there's a huge array of benefits which aren't sort of tangible and we can't touch them, but what's your experience of demonstrating the benefits of art and cultural strategy to us and places? And can you share any of this work with us?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, right now, one thing that we're finding is that the presence of a cultural strategy is attracting better tenants for development. And better tenants for the development also means, a better commercial rate. We've just done a lot of research for one particular client through Futurecity, and we're finding that, the creative industries, that space can be sold, very often at the commercial market rate. So what we're finding is that it helps to uplift everyone, and you can find those benchmarks of if you have something on site and if you don't. Another thing that we're working with Urban Art Forum and hopefully with Creative Land Trust is actually to come up with some very basic measurements that help us not just to measure what happened, but what we're trying to do is find the measurements that helped us to predict and project for investors about how involvement in culture will actually provide for them a more stable or a more commercially viable investment. So that's the next trend. Forget about measuring what happened. How can we take the information that we have and start to demonstrate how it can actually show you a much more profitable investment by going this route?
Are there a couple of examples you can draw on there just to who's doing it well at the moment? I suppose it would be a nice thing for people to go.
Who's demonstrating well? You mean the sort of evidence of it?
Yeah. So which cities are doing well in embedding strategy, or which developments are doing well in that respect? Who would be your kind of the benchmark at the moment, you think?
Well, I mean, London has been really strong, and this mayor in particular, the investment that they put of their cultural team and how their cultural team works with planning has been incredibly beneficial. Not only that, in that they've done a lot of research and study that's pulled together a lot of numbers that you can find in their cultural infrastructure plan. Personally, I love working with the city of Melbourne. I think the city and then the state of Victoria have been working quite progressively between their cultural sector and also their developers, and finding how they put it into their policy, but they also have incentives for it. So they find a way to incentivize, the cultural sector in being able to do it. And there we have a project where our cultural strategy as part of the planning permission actually fast-tracked the largest development in Australia through COVID because of the clarity of vision, the credibility and the feasibility about how it really tied into the area. And then also, I think, working with the Heart of London Business Alliance, they just had Arab do a report to benchmark the impact of culture on the West End, and then also what's happening as a result of the restrictions, due to COVID, and what that's going to do to the cultural sector, and then how that's going to have a knock-on effect. And already we can see it has a knock-on effect for all of the other businesses in the area. So there are more and more. It's just, there's so many statistics. There's so many ways in which people explain it and measure it. And what we're hoping is, we might be able to find maybe 5 key factors that we use and we measure on a regular basis. And then that can be put into an investor analysis as just a matter of routine. Yeah,
absolutely. And I always find myself smiling when I walk around Rotterdam as well, just because all the playfulness that comes out in the cityscape as a whole. I think that's what's really important. Right? I think just onto that, I think we can all sort of agree on the fact that we need a little pick-me-up after this year. The world's changed, and argue we could do with this cheering up. But I think, do you see artistic interventions as a way, if not the way, out of this for the human spirit and for urban places? And what's the first event or activity we should organise for cities around the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's starting to happen. It's one of the only ways that we're going to be able to encourage people to come back into city centres. And it's part of what I was saying about, if you invest in being able to have cultural institutions and creative businesses in the area, they will start to develop it anyway. And they mainly, they want permission. And you know, the creatives are the first ones who responded during the pandemic, you know.
Yeah.
It was major recording artists who within like 24 or 48 hours started giving concerts from their homes. The creative industries will just respond, you know, as quickly as possible. And if I can, I'll just share a couple of,
please. Yeah.
I'll flash through, you know, from, you know, different sort of scale of idea. So you just have to pardon me for a moment.
That's all good.
Oh, technology.
Yeah.
Oh, technology. So yeah, one of the things we've been talking about is that, you know, like pivot, adapt, scale, surprise, engage, invite, question, convert. This is all part of placemaking. This is all what creatives do anyway. Flash, flash, flash. I'll get to the point in a second. But you know, some suggestions. Use your artists and your graphic designers to project onto large scale environments quickly. This was part of what we did with the Reveal Festival at the V&A and commissioned, you know, 5 great graphic artists. And for a small amount of money to be able to, you don't have to do projection mapping. You can find a quicker and easier way to do it. You can use graphic designers to start creating these large scale environments that also make, help direct people or close off certain areas, but do it in a playful way that encourage them to almost be a participant in a huge board game. You can think about how all of your small venues actually are sort of sculptures when they're not being used. So that any of those wide open spaces when we feel like we've got curfews or things like that, they don't feel empty. You know, you can think about how you bring things that were all in a shop and you might bring them out in front of it and have, you know, live broadcasts and activity that's an extension of it. You know, Paul Coxedge did this wonderful piece last year as part of London Design Festival. Think about seating that separates us, but in a really fun and desirable way. You know, Wembley immediately just took their busking and like put it on a platform. That's all you had to do the social distancing and still have the entertainment offer. Mark Titchener had this work of his that he redid and quickly revamped and then was just scattered across all of the outdoor advertising, you know, throughout the city. You move cultural institutions in that are going to constantly collaborate. Fashion designers immediately started collaborating with Broadway and West End costume designers. Just keep your ambition high. You know, use your creative sector. People are coming up with these ideas for apps where you can visualize the distance that you need to have. Victor and Rolf just started designing, you know, wear that you want to have that keeps people at a distance. You know, entire cities are saying, well, this is your great opportunity, you know, to extend your piazza, turn your street into a plaza, turn it into a playground. Think about how your theater spaces, even if you can't go in with the traditional way, you know, how you might reuse it. Use it as an opportunity to be playful, you know, with your parks. Or think about, you know, like Leo Villarreal has done with Illuminated River. Use huge scale and treat the entire, you know, city as an artwork. There are many, many ways that you can do things now. There are many ways we could refocus some of the work that have been happening inside. And basically, what we should be thinking about is how our city is the cultural institution. It is our exhibition space. Or like you say, Christopher, we are in a performance all the time. Right? And people are photographing all the time. We're constantly in a photo shoot. So let's do things that make people feel excited to be part of it. And if vanity is one way to lead people out because they want to take a photo of themselves within it, well, then great. But use your designers to help you create a space that makes it fun to investigate keeping space between or dividing up, or being in sections, or feeling like now you have a little box, you know, when you're sitting in the park and it's a private place. Turn the perspective into an opportunity to play with scale that you haven't been able to, you know, in the last sort of 5 to 10 years where we've been pushed to think that only huge numbers, you know, were the measure of success.
That's a really important takeaway. I think be bold, keep your ambitions high, and be playful. I think that's all we need. And we could talk about this all day, I know, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have. So thank you, Sherry. Thanks for sharing those ideas. There's loads to inspire, and loads for the urban designers watching to apply in their work. So really valuable to everyone involved in shaping cities.
Yeah, thank you so much for an opportunity to share some of the thoughts and the work that great artists and creatives are doing.
Yeah, thank you. And that just leads me to say thank you to everyone who's listening to this. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of ideasSPACE by the Urban Design Group, UrbanNous, and me, Christopher Martin. More episodes coming your way, so please do get in touch if you have any questions, and check out the event page of the Urban Design Group to see more around urban specials. Thanks very much.